BYU football are the people's national champion. The Cougars take down Georgia Tech in the 2025 Pop-Tarts Bowl. BYU 25, Georgia Tech 21. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper, with KSL Sports, recapping and reacting to BYU's win over the Yellow Jackets in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. The Cougars close out the 2025 season at 12-2. First 12-win season for BYU since 2001. Quite the season for BYU football, and I got to say, though, at halftime, it didn't look like it was going to be a season that was capped off with an edible mascot and a toaster trophy and Kalani Sitake devouring a Pop-Tart. It looked like it was going to be a dud of a performance when BYU went into the halftime locker room 21-10, trailing Georgia Tech, but they stormed back, scored 15 unanswered in the fourth quarter, and then Evan Schmev Johnson seals the deal, gets that game-winning interception, and BYU takes down Georgia Tech for the win. Incredible comeback indeed, and share your comments, your reactions here on X with me as we're going live, reacting to BYU's big win. Some big picture thoughts, though, just instant reaction to this game. And again, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the Cougar Tracks podcast every single day on KSL Sports YouTube, audio feeds, wherever you get your podcast. This show is available. I thought Bear Bachmeier was fantastic in this game. 27 of 38, 325 yards, one touchdown, one interception, completion percentage at 71%. Bear was brilliant. Only one attempt rushing. He had the 2-point attempt, which was outstanding. Gritty effort there by Bear. But Bear was tough. That first drive, he re-injures what was his hurt ankle in the Big 12 championship game. You're thinking, uh-oh, this is not going to go well. It felt like deja vu all over again. Great opening drive. Bear gets hurt late in the drive. This didn't look like it was going to go well, but Bear was operating at a high level, passing the football. And we knew going in that Georgia Tech did not have a good defense. Really, in fact, it was a subpar, below average defense, and BYU torched those guys through the air. To go for 325, Bear is outstanding. And I think that was something that was a real momentum builder for BYU heading into the offseason. And to do it, too, without LJ Martin, who was out for the game, as he was sidelined after going through shoulder surgery in an effort to be ready for next season, whether it's the NFL or returning to BYU, to be able to put up those numbers without LJ. Impressive night by Bear Bachmeier. I thought the running backs, too, showed pretty well, all things considered. I thought Enoch Nawahine getting the lion's share of the carries in the first half. I thought that was a little bit confusing because I'm thinking, are you going to unleash Jovesa Demouni or not? Because that's what Aaron Roddick teased earlier this week in the coordinator's press conference on Christmas Eve. Well, in the second half, we did see Jovesa, 7 carries, 48 yards, and a touchdown for Jovesa Demouni, a redshirt freshman. The speed was on display. We talked about that earlier in the week. Jovesa, going back to spring ball in March, showed some moments, but they never turned to him in the season. You're thinking, why not? You had no other running backs. And now seeing this performance in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, going for 48 yards, it's even more maddening to think that they didn't turn to him. That one fumble against West Virginia sunk him. Sunk any opportunity of him playing. Yet when called upon in this one, he stepped up. Enoch Nawahine did a good job too. That first drive getting stuffed on 4th and goal, I did not like that at all. I thought, honestly, in that moment, had I been Aaron Roddick, all right, Enoch, you're a senior. Have a nice career. Enjoy it. We're moving on. They stayed patient, a lot more patient than I did. I would. Enoch had 10 carries for 32 yards, 3.2 per pop. I thought Parker Kingston, the receiving game, he was excellent. Carson Ryan had a big game, 8 catches, 120 yards. The safety blanket for BYU. Carson Ryan closes out his BYU career on a high note. BYU's defense, I thought they looked underwhelming in the first half. And look, they basically only gave up 14 points because special teams gave up a touchdown. Cody Hagan on that kickoff return, fumbling the football and then not recovering it. And Georgia Tech takes over on BYU's 6-yard line. And one play later, it's 21-10 before you can even really blink. And you're suddenly going, what just happened here? But BYU's defense, though, they were giving up a lot of yards. It was kind of a lot of what we've seen from BYU's defense this year. They would bend, but they would be tough to score on in the end zone. And I thought they ultimately did not break. And that was kind of the highlight of BYU's defense on a night where all the speculation swirling around the status of Jay Hill. And we'll get to that coming up a little bit later, as well as Kalani Sitake was asked in the postgame press conference about Jay Hill and his status. And it gave me a flashback to what he said back in the summer, all the way back in Big 12 Media Day. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But a really good night for BYU to get this win. And look, there were moments in this game where I'm thinking to myself, maybe Notre Dame did the right thing and just opted out of this thing, because you see the commentary from these knee-jerk reaction people that haven't followed BYU at all this year, and they're saying when down 21-10, see, BYU's a fraud. They're not good. No context over the fact that LJ Martin was out. Jack Kelly did not give it a go in this game. Two of BYU's top players don't play, and you just look on the surface and say 21-10, and then there's not the context of, oh, you got some coaches that are swirling in the coaching carousel. There are some distractions. Has this team been completely dialed in for the week with all the amusement parks and all the entertainment and festivities? None of that context. It was just, oh, you're a fraud. Down 21-10. You're not good. So it was great that they responded. But in those moments in the game, you're thinking, man, was this really worth it? Would it have been better to just opt out? But now that it's happened and they've won the game and they storm back, it's a feel-good moment. Does it mean suddenly that BYU is knocking on the doorstep of going to win a national title? No. Does it mean that BYU is going to be a top 10 team next season in the preseason? I don't expect it. But it shows that BYU this year was an outstanding football team in 2025, and they absolutely deserve to be a top 10 team, and they're one of the greatest teams in BYU football history. And what's exciting for BYU going forward, regardless of who's the coordinators, who are the coaches under Kalani Sitake, and that's the key there. Kalani Sitake is the head coach, and it feels like it's just the beginning of something new. It's what we've known about Kalani Sitake and BYU football to this point. That is now like, BYU football 2.0 with Kalani, because I would say the Big 12 first 3 years, this was 2.0. 1.0 was the independence years with Kalani. Now it's going into 3.0, where it's a new era of BYU football with enhanced resources. I think back to what Fesi Sitake told me in bowl practices, and the commitment shown by BYU means that they can compete with anyone. And I'm paraphrasing, but you can listen to the exact interview on the Cougar Tracks podcast feed. And that's the exciting thing going forward. In this game, you just wanted to, gut check this thing and get it out with a win. And they did that. Georgia Tech, solid football team. I don't think they're great. I know they were once ranked number 7 in the country, and they're solid. But BYU was a much better football team. And that proved itself as BYU, the offensive drives, time and time again, they were reaching the end zone, but they couldn't score points. First 3 appearances in the red zone, which were the first 3 drives, you only have 10 points. First, you get stuffed with Enoch Nawahine on 4th down. You had a touchdown. There was one, too, with Chase Roberts gets blatantly held. I mean, how do you not call that if you're the refs? I thought the refs on both sides were not very good this entire game, the Big Ten officiating crew. But you had your first 3 red zone appearances, only 10 points. That was not good. And then you combine that with the turnover. It was not a good spot. BYU ultimately got the turnover margin equal with the Evan Johnson interception to win it, but they were pretty much swimming in the negative territory in turnover margin, which is never a recipe for success for this BYU team. One thing I think about this BYU team, though, is that, very methodical with the way that they operate. They can sometimes lull you to sleep, but they were highly effective, I thought, offensively. And the way that Bear Bachmeier operated passing the football, I thought he was really good in this game. And long-term thinking about Bear Bachmeier, he is the face of BYU football going forward. And he is the guy that's going to lead this program to the heights that they want to take it. And the great thing is for BYU is they've got a quarterback pipeline with Bear, Ryder Lyons. Enoch Watson joins the mix this year. He was around the team in bowl practices after he returned home from his mission. Now that the fall semester is over, he'll get ready for winter conditioning coming up next month. There's a good stable of quarterbacks, and Trayson Bourget still has eligibility remaining. We saw McKay Hillstead get a snap. Apparently BYU in bowl games, they're going to get to the backup that you never see throughout the year. He will get an opportunity in the bowl game. We saw that last year with Gary Bohannon in the Alamo Bowl as well. But I thought that Bear was as excellent, and it's exciting for the future for BYU to have the Big 12 Freshman of the Year, a guy in his first season without a spring ball at BYU, to toss for more than 3,000 yards, to put up record performances on the ground running the ball. And he was clearly hobbled, nowhere near 100%. I thought that was downplayed quite a bit by BYU, the significance of his ankle injury. And he's able to still grind it out and get a win. Much needed rest for Bear going forward. And BYU has to make him, of course, a top priority going forward in constructing the 2026 roster. I thought Bear was excellent in this one. Kind of looking at some of the deep cuts in this game. How about Nusi Taumoi-Peau? True freshman. We've been singing his praises for weeks this season. Nusi really kind of turned the corner in the Arizona game in mid-October. And Taumoi-Peau, his forced fumble that then bounced around everywhere and ultimately landed in the hands of Isaiah Glasker, his foot forces a fumble. I don't think I've ever seen that. But he was making plays, though, throughout this game, and he took on the role of Jack Kelly's spot. Well, Isaiah Glasker was more in that spot, but Nusi Taumoi-Peau, co-leader in tackles on the night, 6 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 3 quarterback hurries, 1 forced fumble. Like Bear Bachmeier, was an addition to BYU after Troy Taylor was fired at Stanford, and BYU benefited greatly. Imagine Stanford could have these guys right now. They're probably kicking themselves, thinking they wish they could have Taumoi-Peau and Bear Bachmeier, but BYU's got him, and Nusi's going to be someone that's got to be a top priority going forward, because with a potential coaching change on the defensive side, you got to make sure he's locked in. I talked to Kelly Papinga during bowl practices about the DNs, the edge rushers, the Sam linebacker type of guys, and so much excitement about the potential of Nusi, but just the overall group next year and in the years to come. The pipeline is very talented with edge rushers for BYU, and Nusi might be one of the best of the group going forward. For him to take off the way that he did as a true freshman, sky's the limit for him, I think, in his BYU career. This was also a great day, I think, for someone like Keanu Tanavasa. Blocked field goal attempt. Keanu Tanavasa gets a paw up and blocks that field goal attempt from Georgia Tech, because in the second half, there were moments, the fumble where Georgia Tech is moving down the field. And then the field goal attempt, which I thought was a dumb move by Georgia Tech. It's 3rd and 8. Haynes King, quarterback keeper, gains 6 yards. I'm thinking, okay, they ran the ball on 3rd down. We know the drill when it comes to BYU and Aaron Roderick. It's 3rd and long and you're running. That's typically trying to get at least half the yardage to go for it on 4th down. It was 4th and manageable. I fully expected Georgia Tech to go for it. They opt for a field goal. Keanu Tanavasa blocks that thing, and that was huge for BYU and really got some momentum going on BYU's side. But those 2 drives where Georgia Tech's offense was moving and they got to BYU's side of the field, they could have put the hammer down on BYU, but BYU's defense ultimately did not break and got the necessary stops. Big night for Keanu Tanavasa to get that moment. And in the post-game radio interview with Hans Olsen and Greg Wrubell, he talked about how it's kind of trending towards him coming back next season. Look, knee-jerk reaction, always in the moment. Everyone can get caught up in that. And look, I don't doubt Keanu Tanavasa, but let's let things simmer down and let's see how that all goes. But Keanu Tanavasa should absolutely, I think, come back to BYU, maximize your earning potential at BYU, and then take a crack at the NFL. He is an older prospect. I think it was the class of 2019 that he signed. But, Keanu Tanavasa's got a great relationship with Kalani Sitake. I mean, my conversation that I had with Keanu back in the spring that I had where he's explaining, how he had conversations with Kalani's son, KK, about baptism because, KK did not get baptized initially when he was 8 years old. So that relationship between the Tanavasas and Sitakes is deep. And if Keanu's saying he's coming back, great. I know that people will look at that and say, well, look what he did last year when he committed to Utah for the 2025 season, Utah Manamai, and then he ends up going to BYU in the portal. But still, I think that he's got to be a top priority going forward. And I think that he was better than people realized this season. It's just sometimes the defensive tackle impact really doesn't get measured in a box score. But the tandem of him and John Talmoy-Peau in the interior was really good this season. And some of the options that you potentially have in the D tackle spot next year, if he does return, intriguing tandems that BYU could have in 2026 at the defensive tackle position. But BYU, again, gets it done 25-21 in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I thought the television broadcast, again, this is a little bit different for me, just full disclosure. I'm obviously home. You can see the backdrop. I'm in my home office. I stayed home just because it was so close to Christmas. I opted to stay home with my kids for the Christmas season and kind of cover the game remotely from home. But I will say it was weird watching a BYU football game from home on TV. I haven't done that in 3.5 years since the BYU Liberty game. Very strange to watch, and it was not a good TV broadcast. It was not at all. I thought it was not prepared, honestly. I heard even Booger McFarland going into the broadcast in that, transition from one game to the next, going to the desk. Booger McFarland said the key to the game for BYU is LJ Martin. He's been out for days. How do you not know that? I just thought the broadcast was kind of underwhelming. And up until earlier this year, when BYU beat Stanford, I swear BYU lost every game known to man when Mark Jones was on the call. Last year against Kansas, like whenever Mark Jones was on a BYU game, hammer the L for BYU. But obviously the Cougs get it done and get it back. And it's, kind of wordy a little bit, the religious undertones to the final call with Evan Johnson. I'm like, okay, like we got to go there. Anyway, that was just kind of my side tidbit on the TV broadcast with that. The Pop-Tarts aspect, though, was fantastic. I got some Pop-Tarts that were in local stores for the Pop-Tarts Bowl, had the Pop-Tarts Bowl trophy on the Pop-Tart. Really cool stuff. I was sharing that with my kids watching the game. But I thought the post-game celebration was fun, too. Kalani Sitake lapping it up and embracing the Pop-Tarts, just slamming a Pop-Tart fresh out of the toaster. Kalani wants a toaster in his office. Well, now he's got one with the Pop-Tarts Bowl trophy, and he can have fresh Pop-Tarts all the time in his office. But this was a really, really good stage and setting. And people seem, again, Pop-Tarts Bowl, it has this ability to kind of infiltrate just mainstream society because of everyone knows what a Pop-Tart is. And it's so common knowledge that, oh, you got dancing Pop-Tarts, you got mascots that are Pop-Tarts. Oh, you're going to eat a live mascot. That sounds interesting. I want to see that. And BYU devoured 2 live mascots after the game. So really good stuff there from BYU. And the post-game celebration on the stage was a little bit awkward. You got Quick Kasinich just asking these random questions like, you like Pop-Tarts? Which ones you like? Just dragging time while the toaster's trying to work to get that Pop-Tart out, just killing time, stretching that thing out with Kalani Sitake up on the stage. Is someone who kind of works in a little bit of broadcast and being tight on clocks. I could just sense oh man, that was just trying to drag that thing out. Another underrated aspect to this game for BYU in the win over Georgia Tech. I thought Sam Vanderhaar, he had some great punts in this game. Vanderhaar and the special teams at large, I thought they regressed from last season. And tonight, the special teams had a fumble, which coughed up points. Not great. But I thought Vanderhaar, I thought he had 2 excellent punts, pinning Georgia Tech inside their own 10. I thought that was big. And the decision by Kalani Sitake on Georgia Tech's side of the field to ultimately punt, which typically you feel like BYU on Georgia Tech's 49, absolutely they're going for it. I think it was 4th and 4. I thought this is totally BYU's going for this thing. They decided to punt. There was about 2:45 left to go in the game. Vanderhaar pins it inside the 10. I thought that was a great spot. And then the following drive, no pass interference called on Trey Alexander. And this game clearly meant a lot to him, Atlanta native, and no PI called. And BYU forces a 3-and-out because up until really that point, it felt like BYU's defense was not having much success generating 3-and-outs. Thought that was a huge sequence, the decision to punt the ball, because Kalani is so known for being aggressive and always being on attack in those spots. The decision to punt and still rely on that defense to get a stop, I thought that was big for them. And I thought there was also in the kind of looking over some of my notes here on this from BYU's win, Jovesa Demouni, again, he was really good in this one. I also like the play of Isaiah Glasker. There were some missed opportunities by Glasker in this game, but he ended up with 6 tackles, 3 solo. All in all, just a really sound performance by BYU to storm back and get the win. It wasn't pretty. It's not going to be one of the iconic games in BYU history for a complete 60 minutes. Like last year in the Alamo Bowl, that was dominance for a complete 60 minutes. This was anything of the sort, but they found a way to get it done. And now Kalani Sitake goes to 6-2 in bowl games as BYU's head coach. In the first 10 years, he has led the program. That's a great record. BYU historically has never been a good bowl team. You go back in the day with Lavelle Edwards. I mean, BYU rarely won bowl games. Granted, I think bowl games were tougher opponents back then, but this was a really good opponent, nationally ranked, top 25. You don't get many of those top 25 opportunities. BYU's gotten it back-to-back years, and they've won both of those games. I think that's really something that's impressive and should be a badge of honor for Kalani Sitake in this program, that they're building up an identity where even if they don't reach the playoff, which has been the case the last 2 years, you win 23 ball games and you don't even come close to the playoff. Help that makes sense. But you still pick yourself up off the mat and go win a bowl game when everyone around you says these games mean nothing. Why should you care? And you still find a way to win. I think that's something that's pretty impressive. And that speaks to Kalani Sitake and the competitiveness that he gets out of these guys in these games, and to not have them opt out. No one was a surefire first-round pick to opt out. I mean, there's been opt-outs in the past. We didn't see Puka Nacua in 2022, but just to get these guys to battle every single year in the postseason, I think that's pretty impressive by BYU. I thought BYU did a pretty solid job defending Haynes King, but he's still, a really good player and a great college quarterback. 22 of 40 was Haynes King, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT. He has that big completion to Evan Johnson, and you thought, it's not BYU's day. They give it up, and Evan Johnson, to his credit, makes the tackle, as Kalani Sitake highlighted tonight, which was an outstanding play in retrospect to show that effort to make the tackle and force Georgia Tech to still take some shots to the end zone and not just give up the touchdown. So that was big by Evan, and it gave him the chance to redeem himself and get that game-saving interception to win the thing. But Haynes King's an all-timer for Georgia Tech, and they've got a really good program. I'm curious to see what Brent Key does going forward now that he's locked in like Kalani Sitake at his alma mater. And now the question is going to become, who's locked in for Kalani's staff? And again, Kalani was asked point blank about Jay Hill and the interest with the Michigan job, and he said that he'll let Jay Hill make an announcement. And it made me think of, what does that remind you of? The Big 12 media days in the summer. Kalani Sitake said when asked about Jake Retzloff, hey, is he going to be your quarterback this year? I'll let him make an announcement. Well, if it was just a foregone conclusion that Jake Retzloff was your quarterback, does there really need to be an announcement? If Jay Hill was a foregone conclusion to be your defensive coordinator, does there need to be an announcement? There's been reports out there tonight that from the Michigan media that very, very close to Jay Hill being the defensive coordinator for Michigan. And I got to say, that makes sense. I think one of the things that's getting forgotten at times, because I know Cougar fans are having the fear of life before Jay Hill was in the final season, 2022, the worst defense, I would say, in college football that year. I know statistically they weren't, but in 2022, BYU had one of the bottom 10 defenses in college football, maybe the worst. I mean, they were giving up points and yards to everyone. So that fear kind of comes into the mind of Cougar fans. But remind yourself, again, this is a new era, and Kalani Sitake was the man that had the vision to hire Jay Hill when they made the decision to part ways with Ilaisa Tuiaki. And Ilaisa Tuiaki's defenses in the past were not always disastrous. They were not aesthetically pleasing, and they did not generate the pressure and the havoc that we've grown accustomed to under Jay Hill defenses, but they were sound. There was a lot of top 50 defenses. Okay, just middle of the road. I think that fear creeps into the mind of Cougar fans going forward, because now as you navigate the Big 12, you got to have another excellent DC. I have a lot of confidence in Kalani Sitake that he will be able to respond. If Jay Hill leaves, I expect Kalani Sitake will be armed and ready to have a next guy that will be able to level this thing up to greater heights. Because, look, when you're winning, that means you're wanted. And programs like Ohio State and Alabama, they always lose coordinators, and you keep the machine rolling. And what has Kalani Sitake said since he signed this extension? He wants to build a juggernaut. Those programs are juggernauts. And it might sound crazy to try to put BYU in the breath of those programs. And look, they got a long way to go to get even into the conversation of that. But that's what Kalani's aspiring to be. And if you don't want to be on board with that, well, get out of his way. Well, that's what he wants to build. That's his goal. That's his aspiration, to turn BYU into a powerhouse. And powerhouse programs are going to lose coordinators. But you have to have the resources necessary to go get great coordinators. So when the fear that Cougar fans experience, I don't think it's necessary. Because when Kalani was first assembling his staff in 2016, that was a coach that was just trying to get the opportunity to be the BYU head coach. And he was dealing with a limited salary pool. And he was getting steady results from Ilaisa Tuiaki. But ultimately, when it bottomed out, he made a change. And he made an excellent change and got Jay Hill, an excellent defensive coordinator, who I think's, probably the best defensive coordinator BYU's had since Bronco Mendenhall. When Bronco became the DC back in 2003, and he brought with him the 3-3-5, Jay Hill's been outstanding for BYU. But if he leaves and goes on to work at Michigan, I don't blame him. Because one, Kyle Whittingham, a great mentor to him, someone that means a lot to him. I remember asking Jay Hill in October, in that Utah week, his relationship with Kyle Whittingham, if that's been impacted by his move going to BYU, and he didn't say that was the case at all. And he had so much respect, almost kind of held back emotions about his respect for Kyle Whittingham. And he's never had the chance to be the DC for Kyle Whittingham. And being at a place like Michigan could open a lot of opportunities for Jay Hill. And Kalani Sitake is all about creating opportunities for his coaches to get to the highest levels of the sport. And you never know how this crazy coaching world happens and what maybe twists and turns it takes down the road. And you always want to maintain positive relationships going forward. But I do believe that Kalani Sitake, when he needs to make changes, it always works out well. When BYU lost Jeff Grimes, people thought, oh no, the toughness is gone. BYU is no longer going to have a bad cop in the room. They went and got Aaron Roderick, stayed in-house. It was an easy upgrade promotion, but they've done a very good job. A-Rod has been really good. There's been times where you sometimes question a little bit of the decisions on personnel and whatnot, but what he's done with the quarterback position, it's been really impressive with Aaron Roderick. So again, Kalani, whenever he has to make changes, BYU, I think, gets better long-term in the process. And I think that's what I don't feel like Cougar fans should get bent out of shape over any sort of changes and think, oh no, you lose a defensive coordinator, you're suddenly going back to being a terrible defense and not being able to win football games. No, you're now competitive. You've got resources that can go get a very promising coordinator, whatever their background is. And Kalani Sitake has networked a ton in coaching carousels over the past decade, being BYU's head coach. And that's where these moments, with all the connections and guys that he's gotten to know over the years, have to come to light and be able to deliver a great staff. And I trust that Kalani Sitake would do that. And I think that BYU will be in a good spot with Kalani Sitake going forward. And it'd be great if Jay Hill stayed on board. But obviously, with the reports out there on the Michigan side of things, that things are very, very close with Jay Hill being the Michigan coordinator. Be interesting to see what happens. I would imagine you would think that there would be a lot of movement on that here very soon, because all of these teams, BYU, Michigan, they want to have a strategy in place when the portal opens on January 2nd and they can hit the ground running and really know what direction they want to go on the attack and make some moves. So I'm sure there'll be movement on that going forward. It's interesting, too, how Kyle Whittingham, new Michigan head coach, is in Orlando, and BYU, of course, just wrapped up tonight here in Orlando. But I think BYU is going to be in a good spot no matter what. No matter what their situation is with the coaching staff, I think Kalani Sitake is the right man to lead the charge. And you see what he's doing with building out these rosters and the talent that he's accumulating into the program. And look, if Jay Hill leaves, you got to think there's probably going to be some players that follow Jay Hill. But I'd like to think with the culture that Kalani has built, that it's not going to be as big of a mass exodus as you would think. And I think that many people thought in basketball when Mark Pope left, all is lost. BYU's good fortunes are gone. Their ability to compete in the Big 12 is long gone. Well, they massively upgraded in a big way and in a way that no one could have imagined. That's got to be the goal for Kalani Sitake going forward, that if you do lose Jay Hill, you still upgrade and level this thing up to greater heights because of your enhanced NIL and resource budgets. You're going to be able to fill out better rosters than ever before. That's the challenge in front of Kalani Sitake going forward, and he's got to be the man to do that. And his passion for BYU makes him the right guy to lead that charge for BYU going forward. But the fact that you got coaches that are wanted, I think that's a good thing. The days of Lavelle Edwards staffs and everyone just staying for 20, 25 years, that's just a thing of the past. And it is. And sometimes in coaching, you want to reset your clock, get a new title that makes you a little more glamorous for potential head coaching opportunities. It makes all the sense in the world for some coaches to make a potential move. And we'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming days on that. But it was a huge win, again, for BYU. 12-2 on the season. First time since 2001 BYU gets to 12 wins. That to me is really impressive for BYU, because you would think with how much winning BYU has experienced since that year in 2001, the Bronco years, there were great teams from 06 to 09. Kalani's had some outstanding teams, but never got to 12. A really impressive year, one that's going to be remembered, I think, for a very long time for BYU. And now with the season over, my mind starts to instantly go to 2026 and what's next for BYU football. I've already kind of pieced together over the last, I'm trying to think when the second bye week was for BYU this past season. It was right after the Iowa State game when things started to heat up with Kalani Sitake and his contract extension talks, and those were dragging, and then Penn State gets in the mix, but I digress. 2026 BYU football. I've been working on this, piecing together the roster, potential roster, and tracking personnel. We'll have trackers up on KSLSports.com during portal season and winter conditioning, spring ball. It's going to be a very busy year tracking all the movement with 2026 BYU football, coaching staff changes here on the show. But I look at this team, and an area of focus to me for BYU on this roster in 2026 has to be at running back. I think the running back position has to be a key focus. Even if you get LJ Martin back, I still look at this as position group and say there is not a clear-cut RB2. I think Sione Moa is, and I think the coaching staff believes that he's an RB2. I mean, that's evident by how they treated him this year, but he's been banged up, and there hasn't been enough of a sample size to say, you're RB2, and we're going to trust you. So to me, you hit the portal and go get a guy or two. And if you lose LJ to the NFL, well, maybe you go get 3 running backs. Some of the other personnel you've got that have remaining eligibility, Preston Rex is a senior next year. Lucky Finau, Sione Moa, as I noted, Jovesa Damuni, who had a nice game tonight. Devon Eka joins the program from Lehigh High School, and Logan Payne as well. Charles Miska in there as well. The skill position at wide receiver, you've got Parker Kingston. And let me just say, too, Parker Kingston, he legit could be a wide receiver 1 next year. He really could. I think we need to look at him in that light next season. Coming into this year, I think there was a thought of, maybe is Tiger Bachmeier going to unseat him in that slot receiver spot? Maybe Cody Hagan will take over his spot. Not the case at all. Parker Kingston, after he navigated the early fall camp injury, that kind of slowed him a bit in the first month of the season. He was excellent this year. Leading receiver for BYU this season. Kingston, excellent player, and really took off this season. And coaches kind of hinted at that back in the spring, where they really expected Parker to become an everyday, reliable guy. He lived up to that billing and was really good for BYU this season. You bring back JoJo Phillips, who I thought had a solid game tonight. JoJo, really from his return, remember he came back for the Texas Tech game in Lubbock, that was another thing in the TV broadcast. They kept saying he returned for the Big 12 championship and didn't have a catch since the Stanford game. And I'm thinking, guys, he returned to the first game in Lubbock, not the Big 12 championship. Anyway, JoJo, I thought, had a nice performance tonight. I thought he played pretty well. He ended up with 4 catches, 53 yards. Nice showing from JoJo. Because there were times in his return back from the injury where he was dropping passes. But the potential is there for JoJo Phillips. But again, I think it's no longer just like going to anoint him. You have to go earn it. And I think you bring in some transfers to this wide receiver room, kind of an iron sharpens iron deal, where there's going to be competitive depth to come in and compete and take your spot, and you better rise up to the occasion to go win that thing. Outside of Parker Kingston, I'm not handing over any designated spot to anyone besides Parker as a bona fide starter. I think Cody Hagan's got a ton of potential. Sometimes I wonder if he is being utilized incorrectly. I think he's more of an outside guy, an X-receiver type, not necessarily an inside slot guy. Reggie Frischneck, Tay Nakua. You bring in Jet Nilsson, Terrence Sarion from the high school ranks, Legend Glasker. I think you need some portal guys there, a receiver. I think you got to get maybe 2 guys at the receiver spot to really add to this group next season. Tight end position, Carson Ryan, tip of the cap to him. A career night in his final collegiate game. 8 catches, 120 yards, 68 yards after catch for Carson Ryan. So that's good film for him in his pro prospects potentially. And I hope he gets an opportunity in the pros. And don't you love, too, when you hear from Carson Ryan, he's saying, man, I wish I would have been here all of the years in my collegiate career. And that's the challenge in front of Kalani Sitake going forward, is to get those local kids to not commit to UCLA, to not commit to Utah, to sign out of high school guys that should be at BYU, get them in year 1 and retain them, and don't have them feeling at the end of the road when they're at BYU say, man, I wish I would have played all 4 years at BYU. But Carson Ryan was excellent this year for the Cougars and really revived a tight end position that was pretty dead in the first 2 years in the Big 12. Carson Ryan did a nice job. But looking ahead to 2026, you got Kean Need, who's got eligibility remaining. Ethan Wood, who was involved in bowl practices, a former New Mexico State transfer. curious what he could become next year. Noah Moeaki started the year strong with that touchdown grab against Portland State, but not much heard from him. We saw him a little bit in some B formations, but again, to be determined. It's a little bit of an incomplete grade so far on Noah Moeaki heading into his redshirt sophomore season next year. Tucker Kelleher, Jacob Nye. Jacob Nye was a guy in fall camp that was dealing with a bit of an injury. What does he become going forward at the position? Intrigued by him. Cole Clement. Again, you probably need a portal guy. And Walker Lyons, USC transfer, I think he would be the perfect fix. And I think you tell Walker, hey, what Carson did in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, that's what we want you to do. And I think that's the type of film you show to Walker Lyons, who's the older brother, of course, to Ryder Lyons. You say, that's what we envision you becoming. And like Carson, Ryan, very limited stats through the first handful of years in his collegiate career. He could really take off at BYU, and he's got multiple years of eligibility remaining. I think he's one to watch going forward. The offensive line position is interesting to me. We saw Isaiah Jada go down in this game, and that was a bummer too, because Jada playing his final game as a BYU Cougar in his collegiate career, he said on X, "Thank you, BYU." Jada, quiet, humble guy, went about his business, worked hard. I thought he did a really solid job for BYU. But I think this offensive line can get to a higher level. I think there's more to be had and more to be desired with this group. And look, Bear Bachmeier took some hits tonight. I thought he took a lot more hits than ideally you would have liked if you're Aaron Roderick and TJ Woods, the offensive line coach for BYU. But, personnel-wise, if you're looking at who do you retain from this group, Andrew Gentry's got to be someone that maybe he takes on the role of the left tackle position next season. It seems like there's a little bit of a tendency where you play right tackle, and then your junior or senior season, you're anchoring the left tackle spot. That was the case with Isaiah Jada, happened with Blake Freeland. Kingsley Suamataia did it. It would make a lot of sense. Gentry goes into a senior year, moving from right tackle, go over to the left tackle position. He played that spot at Michigan at times too. That would make a lot of sense to me. Other offensive tackles for BYU, you're going to look at Bot Molitalo, true freshman from Lone Peak High School, a top 100 recruit, former Oregon commit, was once a D lineman, flipped over to offensive line. I mean, Kalani laid it out. He's got Penei Sewell, Kingsley Suamataia, build and potential. Enough said. You're going to expect him to come in and compete right away, but there's other options too. Andrew Williams is going to be a big-time player. I think he's someone as a redshirt freshman could be outstanding. Ethan Thomason, he got banged up in bowl prep, and we'll curious to see what maybe he becomes in spring ball. But Ethan Thomason, excellent football player from the state of Colorado. I think he's got a bright future ahead. BYU's got really good tackles in the wings, and you still got Caden Chittister too, who was a backup on the depth chart this season. He'll be entering his redshirt junior year. He's been around the program for a minute. He once gray-shirted, then red-shirted. Now he's going to be heading into his junior year. You want to see that leap from someone like Chittister if he's part of the program and assuming that he's got eligibility remaining, that he's going to be in the mix. You've also got, Joe Brown potentially as a guard, Iki Tupo as well at that guard position. Sioua Finau, he's one to watch too at tackle. Again, I like the options that BYU has. Jeff Lewis, Chad Lewis's son, he is a big body, was part of the bowl practices. He got banged up earlier in the year. I think he's going to be a really good player for BYU in the future. Trevin Osler's someone that can play that tight end position at the beef spot, but he can also compete in the interior of the offensive line. You've got Sonny Mocassini returning, Bruce Mitchell. He's got eligibility remaining to come back as BYU starting center. Kyle Safarachok, he was a junior this year. I thought Safarachok was really good. I think he could be outstanding for BYU next season. So there's good options. You got Trevor Pay, Sione Hingano. I think BYU's O-line, maybe if you could get a transfer potential, but it's so hard on the offensive and defensive lines to get transfers. Running backs, wide receivers, you can get them falling off trees. There's just so many skill guys that infiltrate the portal. Linemen are harder to find. It's not easy to find a Caleb Etienne for BYU or just really any program, because if you're good at the offensive line, you're going to stay at your spot and you're not going to leave. That's hard to do. So that's an area where maybe if you could get a premier lineman, that'd be nice. But I do like the top end options for BYU at the tackle and the interior of the offensive line next season. You know, the defensive line, I think that they're going to be really exciting. I talked about it earlier about the promising pipeline that they're building up for 2026 and beyond. And, you know, if you do lose Jay Hill, when you go to the defensive side and look at the personnel, you know, you got to maybe fend off, Jay Hill and Kyle Whittingham potentially for some of these guys. And someone that I'm bullish on for next year and the years to come is Tausili Kana. And when he was tearing it up in fall camp, I was like, I've seen enough. Like, this guy is going to be outstanding. And for whatever reason, it just didn't materialize early in the year where he's playing. And, there's a knock on that, hey, he's still learning the defense. Took a little bit of time. He even acknowledged that maybe it was a little bit steeper learning curve than initially thought. But Akana has just raw ability that you've seen every single week. Really, since the Arizona game in October, he has been a consistent guy that just generates pressure, and you continue to add weight. That was a big focus for him when he transferred over from Texas, was adding to the weight to his frame. He just couldn't do it on the 40 acres. He's done a really good job of it at BYU, but I think there's still more weight to be added onto that frame for Akana. If he wants to become an NFL guy, I think he's got to add a few more pounds, but he's loved this BYU experience so far. Really close with Raider DeMooney. I think he's going to be someone that's a face of the defensive line next season. Bodie Schoonover, solid season for Bodie this year in his junior campaign. And look, we've talked about Bodie for so many years since he, was a heralded recruit coming out of American Fork High School. He heads into his senior season. I think he should be one of the leaders of this team. From the fact that he's going to be a senior, I think he's a really good locker room guy, well-liked, but solid. I think there could be a jump for him next year too, because really up until this season, he wasn't playing. He was always in that 2 deep behind Batty, but he never really touched the field. Now that he's got significant playing time and the confidence that he can do it, I think that allows him to maybe become something greater in the offseason next year, potentially. So I think Bodie Schoonover, Tausili Akana, really like the options at DN. You've still got Viliami Puha, Kenny Lau-Fonahema. I thought he was coming on late this season. He's going to be good. Hunter Clegg. Now, Hunter Clegg, that's someone that was a Jay Hill recruit. And, you might have to fend off Jay Hill if he, in fact, does go to Michigan. But Clegg's going to be a good one, too. He hit a little bit of a mission wall, as Kelly Papinga noted to me. And you can kind of see that early on in the season against Portland State in non-conference play. He came out strong. And I just think it was a little bit of that mission wall. That happens to true freshmen after the mission. But he'll go into his sophomore season. He's got promising future. He could be that bull rusher. You've got Bodie, you've got Clegg. They're going to be the ones getting the most snaps at that bull rusher spot that previously Tyler Batty anchored on this defensive line. Someone that I really like, too, that I think is going to be a good player, I've talked about him before on the podcast, is Cepha Brown, former Highland High signee, really good athlete. This guy, he's got the frame. So when Kalani Sitake one day says, hey, you guys in the media didn't know about Cepha Brown, you can say, hey, Kalani, Mitch was talking about him on Cougar Tracks moments after the 2025 season ended. Cepha Brown will be an outstanding football player for BYU. He redshirted this year, but his frame, that's going to be a body that's hard to keep off the field. He's going to be a good one for BYU. He's a really good athlete, too. He's got the size and the athleticism. He's going to be someone to watch going forward. You got Devo Tuataga, David Tangalanu, Nehemiah Cologne. I mean, BYU's building it up. And that's where you've seen the growth with Jay Hill, Kelly Papinga, the defensive end, Sione Puha. That defensive line is really evolving and kind of finding its stride, because a handful of years ago when BYU was entering the Big 12, the defensive line was nowhere near ready. I feel pretty confident with this group right now. If you can retain these guys and not lose players to the portal, that is a good group to roll with. And, again, if you can get a portal guy, I'm always intrigued by portal additions if he can make you better. But I do think the current personnel is pretty good. I mean, Orion Maile-Kafusi as well. He was a guy that got some game snaps. BYU's got options there. Vincent Tautua, he was someone who dealt with an injury in fall camp, missed all this season as a freshman. If he runs it back, redshirt freshman year coming off an injury, be kind of like a true freshman season for him, but he was someone that signed in the 2025 cycle. So there are options galore at that spot. Adney Reed comes back from a mission. So I like BYU's personnel at defensive end. Defensive tackle, Keanu Tanavasa, if he returns, as he said in the radio post-game tonight, that would be huge. And you pair him up with Anisi Purcell, that would be, to me, the starting tandem at defensive tackle for BYU. Justin Kirkland, redshirted this year. He runs it back, the former Oklahoma State transfer. You've also got Kendall Wall, who I noticed in bowl practices, he's starting to add the weight. Coming out of Mountain Ridge High School locally, primarily played that defensive end spot, but BYU projects him in the interior. He's starting to add to his frame. That's a time-consuming deal to add weight when you're not naturally operating at 285, 290 pounds. So, but Kendall Wall, he will be a name to watch potentially as early as next year. And even Maverick McManus, a preferred walk-on, he's starting to add to his frame too. So sometimes these guys at redshirt, where they get opportunities to play early on, and that was noteworthy with Kendall Wall. Like, he was getting opportunities to play DN, kind of think of the John Nelson, Blake Mengelson type of lineman. He could play a lot of different spots. The fact that they're getting opportunities as a true freshman, I think it speaks to how they are viewed and the potential that they have in this BYU program. Talatui Pututau as well, someone to watch too for this BYU team. Linebacker spot, really interested to see how this kind of comes together. Isaiah Glasker has, eligibility remaining in his BYU career. Does he run it back? He's kind of kept that close to the vest. When he talked about it in bowl practices, he said he'll have a decision to make. I'm curious to see what direction Glasker goes. I hope he runs it back one more year. I think one more season could do him well, but, we'll see. Ace Kafusi has eligibility remaining. He didn't play in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. And then Micah Kafusi as well. That was another thing in the TV broadcast. It was Mark Jones, I think, the pronunciation on Micah. I can't remember how he said it, but it was like, Micah is pretty standard. The pronunciation of his name is how it's spelled. Like, that's how you say Micah. he kind of made it sound like Maika. It's like, I don't know. Micah Kafusi, he played in this one, and that was a good opportunity for him to really, settle in here. Ephraim Asiata, he's dealt with a hand injury this year. He redshirted this season, really close with Jay Hill. He's someone, that you would maybe watch potentially if there's a move to Michigan. You have to maybe hold him off. He's kind of in that Nusi Taumoi Payau, Sam linebacker, edge rusher. Is he a Michigan guy? I think, Ephraim, he's special. And it's just a matter of, can he become an every down player? Whereas Nusi's got the physical attributes already as a freshman. Ephraim, still a little bit lean. And adding weight to his frame, too, is sometimes a challenge. But Ephraim Asiata in the mix. Pearson Watson, really high on Pearson Watson. I think he's got a huge future ahead of him. Tyler Payne, Blake Lowe, really good player. Braxton Lindsay, you could put him in that edge rusher. Sam linebacker, Nusi Taumoi Payau. He had a close relationship with Jay Hill in the recruiting process. There's options. And then in the inside linebacker spot, Sialia Serra, Che Bryant Strother is expected to run it back. He was with the team in Orlando during bowl practices. Max Alford, he was sidelined due to an injury late in the season. Miles Hall, you get Owen Borg back from a mission as well. And then the cornerback position, the hero of the night, Evan Johnson, comes up with a game-winning interception. Evan has taken significant strides in his, BYU career. The way that he's evolved, I think he's been better than anyone would have expected. He arrived at BYU as simply a speed guy, 10-4, 100 meters guy. And is he just a burner? Is this just a speed guy? But he's evolved into an excellent lockdown cornerback. I think one of the best in the Big 12 next year if he runs it back. I think he could be a preseason, first team all Big 12 cornerback. That's how good Evan Johnson has been for BYU. And the stats, the numbers back that up. Evan's going to be a good player, and he heads into his senior year for the Cougars. It was great to see him get that response after giving up the big play. He gets the game-winning interception. That was great to see from Evan Johnson. You've also got Tavion Beasley, who's going to be a senior. He had some nice plays tonight against Georgia Tech. He plays that nickel spot, could do a lot of different things for BYU in the secondary. Marcus McKenzie, Kevin Doe. Kevin Doe is someone who was a special teams ace this season for BYU. I love his speed and his size and his measurables. Kevin Doe could be one to watch. That's a sleeper, a deep sleeper that no one knows about really right now, but that could make a dent in that cornerback room next year. You've got Trey Alexander, who tweeted out on X. I think he said, what was it, Coug for life? Something along those lines. Like, Trey's a BYU guy. I mean, he has entrenched himself in BYU. And I think Cougar fans love that. When guys that are not familiar with BYU sign with BYU and say, I just love the place, and they embrace it to the fullest extent. You just knew he'd be like a fan favorite, and that's what he's become for BYU. I think there's opportunities for him to continue to get better. But, man, significant increase in snap count this year. I mean, last year he was playing. I think he even appeared in like 8 or 9 games the season ago in his true freshman campaign. This year, though, he was one of the top cornerbacks for BYU early in the season. I remember in fall camp having a conversation with another media member as to who the best cornerback was in the program. And I think Trey Alexander's got that ability. And Evan Johnson's really good. And the other media member was like, I think it's Evan Johnson. This year, definitely Evan Johnson. And maybe next year as well, too. But Trey's got all Big 12 potential in the future for BYU. He's going to be a really good player. A little bit of a tough year for Jonathan Cabella. One, because he was dealing with an injury. This year counted as a redshirt. I think that's the great thing for Cabella going forward, is that he's got 3 years of eligibility remaining in that nickel spot, but at times kind of tough. I think there were moments even tonight against Georgia Tech where, Cabella gave up some yards through the air, but I still think there's a promising future ahead for Jonathan Cabella. And another player who's a sleeper, who really gaining some motion, some movement. I think in these bowl practices, when Kalani talks about bowl practices being so important, true freshman Jordan Chris, he's going to be a redshirt freshman next year. Arlington, Texas native. Chris could be a good one. He could be a big thing for BYU. And look, Jay Hill's loved the state of Texas recruiting, but Chris he kind of fits the profile what BYU has had success with at the cornerback position over the years. And if he sticks this thing out, I remember seeing his family at the Big 12 championship at the team hotel, and they said they love BYU. They're so happy for Jordan. I think Jordan Chris has got a big-time future ahead for BYU, and I think he's someone that we'll hear his name kind of pop up in bowl practice, or in spring ball in about 2.5 months. Think about that, too. Spring ball is really only about 2.5 months away. We're not far off from spring ball rolling. I mean, I'm thinking about it already. I'm like, we're going portal season, January 2nd to January 12th. We got the second signing day in February. Then at the end of February, we've got early March, we got spring ball. And then we got BYU basketball. Then we got spring alumni game. And then practices end in April. But the nice thing is there's no spring portal. I kind of like the spring portal for selfish reasons. I love the content and the fact that BYU added Bear Bachmeier in the spring portal, which was very beneficial. But it's not far away. And then after spring practices are over, we got a little bit of a downtime, but then you got summer camps, you got recruiting, and the next thing you know, it's fall camp, and then away we go. Then it's BYU and Georgia, or BYU and Utah Tech. Season opener. I'm already ready. Let's get it going. 2026. Safety position, you lose Tanner Wall. Massive. Tanner Wall, absolute stud. How can you not love Tanner Wall? BYU man through and through. Tanner Wall became an absolute stud for BYU. Excellent player, all Big 12 performer. And joined the program as a walk-on wide receiver. I remember writing an article about who could be the next Dax Milne for BYU? Former walk-on that emerges as a star. Because remember, Dax Milne was once a walk-on, went on to be an NFL draft pick. I remember in my article back in January of 2021, I said Tanner Wall. At that time, it was because wide receiver. I really heard some good things about Tanner as a wide receiver, but safety was a perfect fit. I remember going into that Kansas game, BYU's first Big 12 game, where Tanner Wall was really starting to gain some traction. I think he then got hurt in that game, but you knew that he was climbing in the program and he was going to become something special, and he was this year for BYU. Big-time loss for BYU. The Cougars will have to retain some key players on the back end of this defense, most notably Faletau Satuala. Brilliant sophomore season for Faletau. Football Writer Association of America, second team All-American. Faletau was outstanding. He had 6 tackles in the game tonight against Georgia Tech. Excellent player. And again, if you talk about Jay Hill maybe making a move to Michigan, he's someone, Faletau Satuala, that you would look at and say, that could be a guy that Jay's going to want to bring to Michigan because they form such a close bond on the recruiting trail. And I don't think you get Faletau Satuala to BYU without Jay Hill. And, Faletau was the type of player that he is coming out of high school. That was kind of wash, rinse, repeat for Utah for many years when they were in the Pac-12, and BYU was, trying to navigate independence. And that type of guy came to BYU, and he's been excellent for BYU this season. So he's going to have to be a top priority to retain and keep him in the fold going forward. I mean, you saw it this week. It was the day with the youth. You saw in the main kind of featured pictures at the Pop-Tarts Bowl, people were taking pictures of the star players that were walking with the kids on that kids' day were Bear Bachmeier, Faletau Satuala, and for Georgia Tech, it was Haynes King and someone else, but kind of treating him like a star player. And Satuala has just big play ability. So he's got to be a top priority for BYU to retain him going forward. Other safeties in the pipeline for the Cougars for 2026, Raider DeMooney. Raider, hard hitter, excellent football player. Hard to believe he's heading into his senior season. I remember Raider DeMooney committing to BYU as an 8th grader when Kalani Sitake was heading into his second season. He had just wrapped up his first season. I think it was the February of 2017, I believe. Raider committed to BYU as a 8th grader in an era of commitments always being broken. Talk about that. A guy that Raider DeMooney is BYU through and through. The DeMooney families are all about BYU and Kalani Sitake. So Raider DeMooney at times I would say up and down, but dealt with some injuries in that Arizona game, missed some key games, but Raider's a good football player. I think he'll be a starter, no question, for BYU next season. Tommy Parasis, he was dealing with an injury this year. I think this year counted as a red shirt. I'd have to go back and look. I think he only ended up with 4 games, and then the postseason, he suited up tonight in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. You got Matthias Leach, who I'm really high on. I think he's going to be in that top 4 for BYU at the safety position this year. Jaron Kalama, Matthew Mason, and then Antonio T.J. Johnson as well in this 2026 signing class. So really good players in that safety spot. You've also got some walk-ons like Joseph Douglas, Crew Clark as well at the safety spot for 2026. And then specialist. This will be interesting. It'll be a new era for BYU. And can we just say, too, it was great to see Will Farron make his one kick attempt in this game. It wasn't a challenging one by any stretch. I think it was, a 22-yard kick for Will Farron. But still, Will was at times struggling late in this season. It was a little bit of a fall off at times. And Will, he really taps into the mental side of the game for, the way that he goes about his business. And he's now going to get ready for the NFL. And I think he's going to have a successful NFL career as he gets ready for the Senior Bowl coming up in about 2 months. But, it was just great to see Will take advantage of his opportunity, and end with a make. Yeah, he had that 22-yard field goal make in the second quarter, 9:49 to go, to get BYU up 10-7 in the game. Will Farron's an all-timer. I think he's one of the great kickers in BYU history. There were some moments this season that were missed opportunity, including the Big 12 championship, but still, Will is going to be someone that is tough to replace. And the guy that you would project to replace him is Matthias Dunn, who's heading into his, I believe, third season with the program. It actually might be, gosh, I have to double check on that. I'm trying to think. Actually, the fourth season, I believe, for Matthias Dunn, 23, 24, 25, 26. So Matthias Dunn, who Kalani Sitake pointed out in fall camp this past August, was having a really good fall camp. Matthias Dunn, you would project to put him as BYU's next starting kicker, but they do have a guy coming off a mission who's got a big leg, huge leg from the high school ranks, a scholarship player. And scholarship, I say that loosely, because if you're on the roster in this era in RevShare, you're a a value player, asset to this team. That's Brody Laga. Brody Laga from Mountain Ridge High School. He'll be one to watch for sure for BYU. Sam Vanderhaar, he went through senior day, so you would project that he probably moves on for BYU. He was one of the older guys on the roster, but he still has eligibility remaining. So we'll see on that with Sam Vanderhaar, because he's got one more year left of eligibility. But again, went through senior day earlier this season on the regular season finale with UCF. So if Vanderhaar is gone, punter options would include Fuller Shirts. And he had an opportunity where he got to start against TCU. I think he had a blocked punt in that game. But Fuller Shirts, maybe that's this area where, we'll see on Brody Laga. He's more a kicker. I don't know what his level of punting ability is there, but that's a spot where something to monitor there. Long snapper, you lose Garrison Grimes. Ty Smith, redshirt freshman, he would be in the mix to take over the long snapping duties for BYU. So that's a way, way, way too early look at 2026, but that kind of tells you where my mind is at. I'm ready to attack the offseason, really try to follow all these moves and get ahead of this and talk about everything that transpires with BYU football this year. But it's been an awesome year. I got to say, doing Cougar Tracks every single day here on the program during the BYU football season has been an absolute blast, and the daily shows will continue. We'll be back on Monday with more Cougar Tracks, recapping BYU football, unpacking everything from the weekend that was. And I just want to say, appreciate all of you for making this show so much fun every single day. All the downloads, the listens, the views on YouTube. It's much appreciated. I think it's been a lot of fun, kind of changing my workflows of how I go about my business in covering BYU, but it's been a lot of fun doing these daily shows with you, and I hope all the passion for covering this team and this program comes through on the mic, on the camera, because I view this as a dream job. This is a passion for me, and like Kalani Sitake, I mean, this is my passion. Covering BYU sports and doing it at a high level, and I hope that comes through on this show every single day. I'm not into clickbait. I'm not into that. I'm just talking real ball talk with you, diehard Cougar fans, casual Cougar fans, BYU alums, wherever you're coming from. I want to just talk to you, real talk about BYU sports, and that's what I always strive to do here on the show, and I hope all of you appreciate that. It's been a pleasure talking tonight. Hope all of you enjoyed the show. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks as BYU takes down Georgia Tech 25-21. The Cougs are the Pop-Tart Bowl champion, 12-2 in 2025, and brighter days ahead under the watch of Kalani Sitake. Talk to you next time here on Cougar Tracks. It's powered by KSL Sports.